Someday, when your mind wanders without warning, I wonder if my face will be the first thing to cross it. Not a perfect statue of who I was, not some polished memory you can admire from a safe distance, but the real, raw person who gave you pieces of themselves like fragile gifts. I didn't love you the way storybooks promise, perfect, uncomplicated, always enough. I loved you in a way that used up my best parts, laughter pulled from the bottom of a tired day, courage stolen from my own doubts, kindness offered even when my hands were shaking. That's the thing about giving everything. You think the other person will notice the cost. But sometimes notice arrives late, and late feels a lot like never. And that's where this begins. You believed I would be constant, an anchor you could take for granted. I showed up on mornings you were afraid to get out of bed. I answered when the world felt too loud, not with grand speeches, but with the quiet presence of someone who listened. I learned your rhythms, when to keep my mouth closed, when to laugh, when to pull the curtains tight so you could breathe. Each small thing was a promise. I am here. I will carry you. I didn't grandstand. I didn't demand ceremonies. I folded love into the little things, the ordinary acts that become the architecture of a life together. But even buildings crack when their foundations shift. Giving becomes depletion when balance dissolves, and devotion can turn into an invisible tax. I thought my offerings were gifts. In time, they became the rent I paid for your comfort, and I started forgetting the price. When the nights were bad, you called me, and I answered like gravity. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because your hurt mattered to me more than my own quiet. I held your secrets like delicate things, even the ones that cost me sleep. I learned to be the shoulder and the safe word, the one who could stand steady when you faltered. I cracked jokes in the smallest hours to lift your weight. I whispered nonsensical stories to make you imagine better things. Those moments, simple, ridiculous, tender, were how I tried to stitch light into your days. Still, tenderness has a way of bleeding out if it's never reciprocated. You soaked up my warmth, and I misread your absorption for satisfaction. I thought I was enough because you were comfortable, because you leaned on me like a tree leans on wind. I did not see the slow thinning of my own branches. Slowly, almost without ceremony, I began to thin. First, it was a missing laugh, less effusive, more measured. Then the colors of my world dimmed. The songs I used to hum fell silent. I told myself it was a season, that this sacrifice would be temporary, that love asked for patience and compromise. But the line between compromise and erasure is fine and dangerous. I gave my mornings so you could have a softer start. I gave my evenings so your nights would feel lighter. I left corners of myself empty, thinking they would refill when things balanced out. They didn't. Instead, my edges faded until I recognized only shadows in the mirror. There's a particular kind of sorrow in discovering you've been living someone else's life for so long that reclaiming your own feels like learning to breathe again. I tried to name what was happening, but names felt inadequate. Was it devotion, obligation, fear? It felt like all of them braided together into something that asked me to vanish slowly. You never asked for grand sacrifices. You simply didn't notice the small disappearances. I didn't have one dramatic turning point to point to. No big betrayal, no explosive fight. It was the accumulation of quiet allowances, the times I swallowed my truth so we could keep the peace, the nights I stayed awake listening to you, the moments I erased my small needs to ensure yours were met. Each erasure was a resemblance of love for a while, until the pattern made a portrait I no longer recognized. By then, the person who loved without counting had begun to count the cost. Then came the moments of reflection that hit me in the most ordinary ways. A song on the radio that used to make me dance now only made me still. A joke I loved felt flat when I tried to tell it. I realized I had been performing a role so long that I had forgotten the lines that belonged to me. The grief wasn't about losing you. It was about losing myself while thinking the trade-off was love. Once that realization landed, it changed the stakes. It didn't become about blaming you for being who you were. It became about choosing myself back. That choice wasn't a dramatic walkout or a theatrical goodbye. It was a series of decisions. Saying no where before, I always said yes. Going to bed earlier. Making quiet plans that didn't include you. Each small decision felt like the cool touch of water on burnt skin. Someday, unexpectedly, your memory will find me. Maybe it will happen at 3 a.m., the kind of hour where thoughts are sharper and softer at once. Maybe it will happen during a slow coffee, when the steam and the silence allow old faces to float up. You will see my laugh in a flash of memory and remember how I used to make whole mornings feel like a small holiday. You will recall the way I held the space for you without asking for returns, the way I smoothed your edges and called it protection. That memory will not be an accusation. It will be a revelation wrapped in quiet. You might find your lips forming my name, as if testing whether it still fits a mouth that no longer knows how to say it aloud. It will taste strange because it will be tethered to a bruise you didn't feel at the time. There's an odd cruelty in memory's timing. It seldom arrives when it would help. It's more fond of surprising contrition. You might feel a softness at first, an ache that whispers, "I miss that," and then a sharper pang as you realize what your absence caused. Sometimes regret comes as longing. Sometimes it comes as a quiet shame that sits in the chest like a stone. You may want to call, to say that you remember now. You may rehearse apologies in your head. But apologies have a life of their own. They don't always bridge the distance that has been made wider by time. There's a difference between knowing you were missed and knowing you were needed. By the time you remember, the need might have moved on. And then one day, like a scene from a life you almost recognize, you will see me from across a small, crowded place. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that the sight of me registers. My shoulders steady, my smile genuine, my eyes measured with the calm of someone who has learned to keep their center. You will notice how the worry no longer lives there, how the laugh lines are not laced with the strain you once knew. It is not triumph in the way stories paint revenge. It is a different kind of justice. It is survival made visible. From afar, you will witness a happiness that isn't made to spite you. It's simply the proof I continued to grow despite the weather you and I endured. Seeing someone you once took for granted living well can feel like a mirror tossed back at you. It reveals the contours of the person you lost and the emptiness you created. You may want to tell yourself you don't care. You may tell your friends you have moved on. But the truth has a way of arriving regardless of declarations. When the sight of my ease catches in your throat, that is the moment you finally have to reckon, not with me, but with what you allowed to happen. That image of me from a distance will be clean, because living forward cleanses a body of past debts. There is no need for vindictiveness. Becoming whole is its own quiet, unarguable statement. I won't be standing there to mock you. I won't parade my joy like a trophy. The way I live on will be ordinary. Morning coffees, stubborn hobbies, small friendships that widen a long-term peace. The contentment you witness will be made of mundane things, phone calls that do not require rescue, dinners that are leisurely, conversations that do not collapse into old fights. My life will not be a novel chapter titled Revenge. It will be a series of small pages that, when read in sequence, show a person who refused to stay broken. If you feel the sting, that sting is not because I taught you a lesson. It is because the truth of what you lost cannot be softened by distance. And maybe, in that silent observation, you will realize how easy it is to take someone who gives everything for you. We mistake availability for inexhaustibility. We confuse presence with permission to consume. We assume steady hearts will tolerate anything because they always seem to. I don't say this to gloat. I say it so the pattern can be seen. If you ever find yourself in the role of the receiver, remember these small economies of care. Reciprocity is not a currency of love, but a lifeline. A relationship balanced by mutual giving is not less passionate. It is more sustainable. When both people bring pieces of themselves to the table, the sum of their lives becomes richer, not emptier. Then there is the lesson that time teaches me. Letting go is not a failure, and surviving a heartbreak is not petty pride. It is an act of courage to step out of a life that was rearranging you into someone you were not. It is a form of protest against a slow erasure that always starts with kindness and can end in loss. I learned the hard way that preservation is not selfishness when it is the only thing that keeps you from disappearing. I learned that my value does not depend on how much I deposit into another person's happiness. There is dignity in choosing to refill your own cup, in reclaiming the laughter you once loaned out. So when the day comes that your thoughts find me, I hope you remember with more than just the details. I hope